So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Mito Uzumaki. So let's start the series. Three mighty entities engaged in a cataclysmic battle long ago as humanity battled to control its violent nature. With the strength of the gods themselves, the twin brothers battled to rid the world of their corrupted mother's tyranny and insanity. The earth was forever scarred, and the conflict was horrific to witness. The brothers sealed their mother into the moon because they couldn't bear to kill the lady who gave birth to them. To make sure the seal wouldn't break, one younger brother offered to stay on the moon. In order to impart his teachings, the older brother came back to Earth. The twins realized that love, understanding, and compromise led to peace. Above all, it was not something that their fellow people could be forced to do or dictate. In order to achieve that goal, humanity had to confront itself, and the brothers were aware that they would not live to witness the results of their efforts. Humanity spread around the world as time went on. Despite his unfathomable might, the older brother gradually passed away. He started a bold strategy because he anticipated the power battle that would undoubtedly follow his death. He fashioned his power after mythical monsters and divided it into 9 distinct wells of power, using all the knowledge at his disposal. With the assurance that they would all reunite at some point in the unknowable future, he gave them the order to scatter into the world of men. The brother's physical body rapidly deteriorated due to the exertion, and he eventually died. Without his leadership, his successors were gradually poisoned by bitterness and jealousy, which led to violence. The peace for which the brothers had fought so valiantly and made so many sacrifices disintegrated in the ensuing decades and centuries, and humanity abandoned the plowshare in favor of the sword. The tailed animals dispersed throughout the human world at the command of their creator, dismayed by the small-scale conflict that ripped through nations and families. Some people lost themselves in time and hid in the world's unexplored wilderness. Others established themselves in isolated areas and were revered as gods by superstitious people. A few were taken prisoner and made into living weapons. The one most devoted to his creator's vision of peace was the most potent of them all, the Nine Tails. He valued education and knowledge above all else because, like his creator, he thought that peace would only be achieved when everyone was able to understand and appreciate one another. Kurama's eyes narrowed as he opened them. He hadn't dreamed about the creator and his brothers in a long time. In the early morning light, Kurama yawned and stretched his legs. Kurama split his time between the human world and the lush bamboo forest he had come to call home for 2 centuries. About every 10 years or so, Kurama left the forest to personally meet his desire for touch and see how far the descendants had come in their quest for peace. He had pretended to be a destitute young man trying to make ends meet on his most recent visit to the human realm more than 10 years ago. On the edge of the woodland, Kurama set up a roadside inn and performed odd jobs for the proprietor. Kurama convinced the chief merchant to accept him as a member of the caravan in exchange for free work when a trade caravan stopped at the inn to spend the night. Kurama traveled across all of the world's main cities and towns for over 3 years. He encountered 1,000 human beings and tasted 1,000 various treats. He left proxies of himself at every location, little replicas of his essence molded into his likeness, who prowled the local library stacks for information and prowled the bars for rumors and the most recent news. After receiving regular updates from a spy network whose allegiance cannot be purchased, Kurama made the decision to resign. He was as disappointed as he was in awe of human intelligence and inventiveness. Humans could create ships that could survive in the most choppy seas and erect monolithic structures that reached the sky, but they didn't appear to be able to, or, worse, weren't willing to, invest the same amount of energy into helping their less fortunate fellow humans. He witnessed desperate men, women, and children hiding in the alleyways of almost every large population center he visited, a population of dregs that had slipped through the gaps of society and now sat in its shadows. Kurama sensed the simmering animosity that was about to blow up at any second. When Kurama saw how his creator's gifts had been tainted, it was the last straw. Kurama had gone to the adjacent stream to get water for the pack animals when the trading caravan stopped at a small settlement. He dropped the buckets and ran back to the village after receiving a burst of core energy from there. The bodies of all the merchants and residents were cooking in an open pit in the town center when he got there. 3 bandits surrounded the pit, sprinkling exposed skin with a primitive fire method made utilizing core energy that had been gathered. At that point, Kurama lost control. He was on a first-name relationship with the head merchant himself and had been acquaintances with many of the caravans that traveled. Everything within 5 kilometers of the village center had been reduced to ash by the time he had regained self-control. The bodies had been replaced by a round circle of shattered glass. The earth itself had melted due to the intense heat of the core energy fire. Kurama withdrew into the wild forest, getting information from his proxies on a regular basis. He was ashamed of his loss of control and couldn't reconcile how far the descendants had deviated from the road of peace. Occasionally, a proxy would reappear, and Kurama would absorb the knowledge and experiences like a sponge. Kurama gained wisdom in human ways within a few years by accumulating nearly 1,000 years of social human interaction. He was always able to discern when someone was lying. He was skilled at reading people's faces. A quickening of the breath, a little lift of the eyebrow, or a twitch of the mouth all spoke a great deal about a person's motivations and intents. Things that took human years to master and perfect were accomplished by Kurama in a single day. He could balance a country's budget, cook an emperor-worthy feast, or execute the Hyuga clan's secret 8-64-palm technique. The fox could not be kept in the dark about anything. He continued learning. Near the center of the forest, Kurama trotted to the area he loved so much. Red, white, and blue flowers danced in the early breeze over the field. He rolled onto his back after finding a little patch of grass and lying down. It should take some time until a replacement proxy was sent out and another one returned. For the moment, he was happy to see the passing clouds. Deep among the jungle came a familiar yet evil figure. As the presence approached, Kurama sniffed the air and looked warily at the tree line. The faint core energy wafted toward Kurama, and he tasted it. He found it to be both distant and incredibly familiar. Kurama braced himself for combat. The grass ceased to move and the air that was flowing across the flower field vanished. A hooded man dressed entirely in black emerged from the forest and headed in his direction. After staring and briefly considering shrinking back to his full size to scare the intruder away, Kurama decided to wait and see how the inquisitive stranger would react. The man halted 10 steps away from Kurama, crossed his legs, sat down, and held out his hands to demonstrate that he was unarmed. Kurama gave a curious tilt to his head. This dude was who? Kurama was uneasy despite his experiences. Despite the growing strain, his inner voice pushed him to wait and see. Reaching up from the robes, the stranger's pale, leathery hands pushed back the hood. A man with a pale complexion who appeared to be in his late 20s took the hood. His long black hair stood out in sharp spikes at the back. The stranger's sharp, angular face was rounded off with black eyes, a narrow, fake smile, and a little nose. The man's fake smile annoyed Kurama. He recognized the kind of smile from his innumerable memories. It was a falsehood, a way to appease someone who was about to be betrayed. "My name is Aiha Madara," the guy said earnestly. "I have come to you, great demon, to seek your aid and bring about peace to my village. The clan of Aiha, one of my creator's direct descendants." Kurama's memory instantly brought up the details from his most recent proxy. They just assisted the Senju clan in establishing the first shinobi community. Senju Hashirama, the Shodai headmaster and the god of shinobi, is in charge of them. Kurama knew a lot of things. Why have they already gotten into a fight? What? He asked himself. And how exactly do you want me to aid you? Kurama questioned, perplexed by the request. Replied Madara, I need your power. I wish to use your power to defeat a man I once called my brother. When Hiroshima Senju is defeated, I will be the undisputed leader of the village. No one would dare to disturb the peace I bring. Kurama bluntly stated, I refuse. He shook his head. So pathetic, so predictable. Madara stopped pretending to smile. Why? Why do you refuse me? Is promise of peace not a worthy cause? He said, his face flushed. Kurama prepared to go, standing on his hands and knees. The Saiha was an echo, a mirror of the insanity his creator had struggled so valiantly to contain. How can you call what you want peace when you impose your will on people? The peace you seek to create is a byproduct of a world without color and hope. I refuse. Madara was taken aback by this reaction. Madara murmured something to himself as Kurama turned and began to walk toward the depths of the woodland. Wait! Yelled Madara. As the air got heavy with the purpose to kill, Kurama turned back to face the insane guy. Madara yelled, I will not be denied. Sharingan. The whites of Madara's eyes turned blood red, and Kurama gazed in wonder. Kurama was struck by a tremendous surge of unreality before he could turn away. He lost his balance as the world began to whirl around him. Unseen forces pushed and yanked at Kurama's consciousness, causing him to stumble and lie gasping in the grass. Kurama gasped, "What? What? What are you doing to me?" Above his torso, he saw the shadow of a hazy figure. Madara spat and came forward, whispering, "Your will is mine now." He then let out an empty laugh. "I will have your power, demon, with or without your cooperation." "Never," Kurama said angrily as he sensed his control waning and his consciousness growing heavier. Madara threw back his head in laughter and said, "That's a demon, let your true form out. Then." No. Kurama's eyes glazed over and he felt reason dissolve. Kurama was growing irate. Furious. Something had to be destroyed. Watching the demon fox return to its former size made Madara grin. The air itself rippled outwards with fire as waves of raw, searing crimson core energy erupted off the fur. Rolling off the body, lumps of raw core energy leaked to the ground. The small field of flowers was now on fire from the heat wave as the fire expanded outwards, and the malevolent core energy sank hissing into the soil and withered the ground it touched. When the demon fox let out a loud snarl, terrified birds flew into the air. With its enormous tails swinging and tearing through the woodland, the fox threw back its head and roared with a passion that rocked the earth. Madara landed on the demon's head with a single leap. "That way, beast," orderly Madara said. The demon coiled its muscles and sniffed in the direction Madara indicated. The demon fox crossed the flaming woodland in a single, enormous leap and began to roar toward Hyde Village. Kurama groaned as he awoke. He opened his eyes and looked about, a terrible headache pounding at him. He seems to have been placed in a study cage the size of a massive warehouse. Silent darkness rewarded him as he gazed out of the cage. No matter where the cage was, it was dimly lit. Kurama reached for the space between the bars with one paw. However, a string of tiny, brilliant green inscriptions appeared in the air before his paw even touched the bars. Moments before Kurama's paw touched the writing, an unseen wall swelled into being. Kurama scowled and exerted more force. Before Kurama recognized his error, the barrier gave down a little. Previously glowing neon yellow, the lettering began to flash crimson. The tiny lettering stretched around the cage and crisscrossed the bars, as Kurama gazed with wonder. As lightning poured inward, the lettering flashed quicker and faster before coming to a complete stop. Pure electricity encircled Kurama's body, causing him to shriek in agony. With a wounded pride, Kurama reduced the human proportions and cautiously made his way to the bars. He walked over to what looked like the cage entrance and put his pawn on the phantom barrier once more for experimentation. The inscriptions showed up as before. Kurama withdrew his paw, having learned his lesson the first time. After 5 seconds of idleness, the inscriptions remained green until disappearing. Kurama sat on his haunches and narrowed his gaze. Examining the symbols carefully this time, he used his paw to activate the barrier seal once more. An overlay of 6 celestial guardian seals on a 12-symbol crystal zodiac seal. The Uzumaki clan from Whirlpool Country is the only group of individuals with the talent to accomplish this. A young woman with red hair tied in buns on either side of her head appeared silently in front of the cage door, as though the clan's mere thinking had called her. From her buns, 2 seals dangled freely. The woman wore a white kimono with a green undershirt and a little copper crown on top of her head. The girl bowed, and Kurama looked at her. She went on in a formal tone, "My name is Uzumaki Mito, second head of the Uzumaki clan. Wife of Senju Hashirama, Shodai headmaster of Hyde Village." Senju. Oh. Kurama connected the dots. If you truly are of the Uzumaki clan and wife of Hashirama, then it means Aiha Madara did not achieve the victory he was looking for. Kurama was even-tempered. If you do not remember his defeat, then does this mean you were under his control? Mito asked, standing up straight and examining Kurama closely. After taking too many blows to his pride today, Kurama nodded and grimaced. He asked, "May I ask how I was defeated?" "My husband is proficient in all 5 nature transformation as well as yin and yang releases," she proudly said. "However, his real power is his ability to create the wood release by fusing the elements of earth and water, which he used to temporarily render you helpless before murdering Madara. The rapid construction of the village can be explained by the discharge of wood." Senju Hashirama was someone his creator could be proud of, not because he was gifted, but because the Shodai headmaster had made the precarious first step toward peace by using core energy to help, not to control, his fellow humans. Kurama was both impressed and happy at the same time. He is deserving, Kurama reflected. To a startled Mito, Kurama bent his head in submission. Please let your spouse know how much I appreciate it. Not just for releasing me from Madara's hold, but also for utilizing core energy for the good of humanity. Mito narrowed her eyes after nodding. I assumed you'd be upset about but you don't seem to be bothered in the least bit, she said, gesturing to the cage as she shifted the topic. Kurama grumbled, I know about 5 different ways I can break out of this prison, all of which will either drive you insane or kill you outright. Indeed, one of his former proxies had been at the main clan mansion in Uzumaki for 4 years. Mida's face became white. Kurama went on without showing any evil intent, but I swear I will not try to break the seal that ties me to you, because I owe your husband for rescuing me. Since the answer is probably no and there are many political and military benefits to letting the world know that your village has a Jinchuriki, I won't ask you to liberate me either. But you have to fulfill 3 requirements from me. The fox, if not brutally honest and direct, was frighteningly cunning, and Mito tensed. What are your conditions? The first requirement is that you lend me your senses, Kurama said. I'd like to watch your type and witness this. Your Shodai headmaster's piece. Before you inquire, let me clarify that I am not a pervert and will not spy on you. Intimacy. Mito reddened. My second requirement is that you come see me whenever you have time. I haven't seen someone I respected in a very long time, Mito said, his face getting redder. And finally, would you please give me a change of scenery? Despite the size of your brains, I am positive that you mortals have a good sense of imagination. I agree to your conditions, Mito said, laughing at the slur against her sort. Wait a moment, Mito said, closing her eyes. The darkness gave way to flat dirt that stretched as far as the eye could see in every direction. The cage bars retreated into the ground as the cage's bottom sank beneath the soil. The dirt darkened as moisture sank into the ground. The smell of water filled Kurama's nose as grass grew beneath him. The once thin saplings rose from the ground and raced towards the sky. The once thin saplings thickened into tree trunks as branches covered and grew out of the tree trunk. A series of soft puffs filled the air as green leaves exploded out of the once abandoned trees. Mida's eyes opened. Kurama curled up in the grass and nodded his approval, saying, Thank you, this is much more tolerable. Without a word, Mito bowed and glowed away. As promised, Mito went to Kurama once a week to discuss the world's latest happenings, but he already knew most of it because he had access to her senses. Initially too formal for her station, Mito gradually relaxed her guard around Kurama, and although their conversations frequently turned into verbal sparring matches, neither would admit they enjoyed their little games. When Kurama asked Mito what the shinobi were used for in one of their first conversations, he was deeply disappointed to learn that the shinobi were an elite mercenary military force, but he was somewhat comforted by the fact that the majority of the contracts Hyde Village accepted were either humanitarian or peacekeeping missions. Occasionally, there would be an assassination contract, but Kurama was reassured that nearly all of those contracts were for bandit leaders and other shady human figures who had made the mistake of upsetting influential people too many times. Kurama was also shocked to discover that shinobi were supposed to be stealthy. According to the shinobi code Mito had previously explained to him, every shinobi he had seen through Mida's eyes had a tendency to attack loudly and flamboyantly in broad daylight, shouting the names of their attacks. Naturally, Mida's irritable husband Hashirama was the worst offender to the shinobi code, and Mito had shrugged off Kurama's question in shame, and was grateful when Kurama decided not to pursue the matter further. The years passed quickly. Mito aged elegantly, yet she grew older. Her smooth, pale skin turned to wrinkles and age spots, her red hair turned to brown, and she lost the ability to move with the grace she had once possessed. Since he had thoroughly enjoyed her companionship throughout the previous decades, Kurama realized that the moment for their separation was rapidly approaching and he feared the inevitable. As Mito aged, so did the forest in the mindscape, its lush green leaves drying and turning into a riot of crimson and orange, and when the wind blew, scores of them snapped off and fell to the forest floor. In the clearing, Mito appeared, and she sat down slowly and carefully without shifting from her seat, while Kurama stepped down from the limb he was sitting on and trotted over, sitting next to her instead of across from her, and they watched at the falling leaves without saying anything to each other. After clearing her throat, Mito eventually stated, It is time. I know. Are you okay with remaining in the community in this manner? Going to another prison, are you okay? I would like to observe more, Kurama shrugged. The area known as Hyde Village has only grown more fascinating over time. This location has a great deal of potential to fulfill my creator's vision. Quiet. A while later, Kurama said, I will miss you though. She grinned and used her hand to gently brush the fur on top of Kurama's head, saying, I will miss you too. Silently, the leaves dropped. Kushina, a young girl with a stubborn personality and a tendency to shout, was selected mainly because of her unusually large core energy reserves and her ability to manifest core energy chains that can be used for both attack and defense. Kurama's new jailer was another member of the Uzumaki clan. When Kurama awoke, he was in a cage he had seen previously. It was the same cage Mito had been in before she had altered the scene. A prisoner would be more likely to cooperate if they were given the carrot instead of the stick, so Kurama scowled as he shrank back down to human size. They really need to figure out how to make this still better. Kushina, short and slim, with violet eyes and the flaming red hair characteristic of the Uzumaki clan, appeared in front of the cage with a small boom, as if summoned by his complaints. She began yelling right away, I'm not scared of you, demon fox. Now that you're in my prison, you'd better behave yourself well or else. He disliked spunk, but he'll give her that she had a lot of it. Kurama looked silently. Returning his gaze, Kushina folded her arms and said, Well, have you got nothing to say? Whatever you say. Kurama muttered flippantly, turning his head and lying down with his back to her. He sensed a tiny wave of rage coming from her at his obvious contempt. After her rage subsided, she said, You're not quite like what the others say about you. He laughed, but then he looked at her, who was staring fearlessly into his eyes with her arms crossed. I usually have a reputation for inflated. Many of your relatives have a tendency to make easy reasons for misfortunes. That last statement was only partially accurate, but Kushina didn't need to know the specifics. I don't really mind if it helps them cope with the harshness of this world, but you should know I'm not really the kind that flips mountains upside down and burns down villages. After giving his words some thought, she answered, Sorry, I take back what I said. Apology accepted, Kurama said, sitting up once more. He was making progress now. Just so you know, it's not really in my character to cause trouble. Nevertheless, I need you to perform 3 things for me. Kushina remained silent expectantly. Kurama outlined the same guidelines that he had established for Mito. After hearing his demands, Kushina closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and nodded her head in agreement. Grass grew from the brown soil in every direction, green stretched as far as Kurama could see, and as Kushina let out his breath, the cage ceiling flew upward into darkness and the cage bars fell outward onto the ground, while a trickle of water flowed from Kurama's left and grew into a gentle flowing stream between the two. The sky brightened into a vivid hue of orange and red, the fading light of the sinking sun reflecting off of the lazy clouds. Kushina's eyelids opened. Is it better ? She inquired. Kurama nodded and said, Better. Come see me sometime, youngster. He boasted, You might be surprised at how smart I am. See you later, Mr. Fox, Kushina said, sticking her tongue out at him. The name is Kurama brat. Kurama grinned. As Kushina poofed out their shared area, he yelled. She had the subtlety of a creative class 2 exploding tags, and Kushina never really grew out of her personality. She was loud, brazen, and prone to violent confrontations. Generally, the only way to solve her problems was to apply overwhelming force behind a closed fist. Although Kurama didn't like her at first, he eventually warmed up to her because she was frank in everything she did and with everyone she encountered. However, after Kumonins attempted to kidnap her, things changed. Kurama had been searching for a way to temporarily remove the imprisonment shield without hurting her, but he had been unable to do so until a yellow flash appeared and he defeated all the enemies by himself. Kurama had a good look at Kushina's savior, a slightly tanned man with blue eyes and golden hair that was held back by his forehead protector. He had a sharp face that exuded confidence. Yeah, the yellow flash, Kurama pondered. The fact that Kushina fell deeply in love with Namake's Minato was not particularly surprising. What surprised Kurama was when Kushina came to him for assistance. Kurama, half asleep in the grass, was awakened by the disturbance, and he stretched and uncurled from his sleeping positions. As he trotted over, Kushina impatiently tapped her feet and said, You don't typically come to me during the week. Are you bothered by something? It was true that she only ever came to see him on Sundays, so he asked. Yes. No. I mean. Her cheeks heated and she looked down, saying, I need your help. She had never, ever asked for his assistance. Kurama decided not to make fun of her since he knew she had swallowed her pride for this. He'll enjoy himself later. So, how may I assist you? With more curiosity than anything else, he asked. She trailed off, saying, well, I need your insight. Which tells me nothing at all, Kurama thought, but if she is skirting the problem in this way. Is this related to Minato? He took a risk. Yes. No. I mean, perhaps. This will take time, Kurama moaned. He was almost back to his favorite napping location when he felt her rage flare up. Kurama rolled his eyes and began to gallop away, saying, if you don't tell me exactly what you need from me, then stop wasting my time. To get Minato, I need your assistance. Get Minato to agree with me. I said it there. Are you glad now? She was breathing heavily from screaming, and her face was rapidly turning the color of her hair as she screamed at him. Kurama sat down on his haunches facing her and trotted back. He smirked and answered, yes. Kushina released a huge wave of crude murderous intent that struck Kurama like a sledgehammer. Kushina? With trepidation, he inquired. Kushina's face darkened, her violet eyes vanished behind a white haze, and she lowered her hands to her sides and clenched them into fists as she slid into a combat stance, her feet spreading apart and body hunching slightly. Kurama wondered himself, is this a new bloodline development? Kushina's hair, which she usually wore down, took on a life of its own and rose and bobbed behind her independently of each other. Core energy chains appeared behind her and reached up and to her side. The sharp stakes bobbed up and down as they oriented themselves at Kurama. Faint blood traces trickled between her fingers, indicating how tightly she was clenching her fingers. The normally lazy afternoon sunset that Kurama had come to love darkened as clouds ate up the sky, lightning stricken and shattered the landscape. Wisps of white smoke rose from the soil and solidified into arms, drawing Kurama into the ground as the soil shifted into faces twisted in pain and howled. In a panic, Kurama spoke rapidly, unable to maintain a steady tone of voice. I'm an expert on human relationships and I know of a great many ways to attract members of the opposite sex. Kurama continued to speak. The faces in the earth crumbled, the arms scattered in the grass, and in a moment the furious dark clouds vanished into the air, revealing the lazy sunset. Oh, is that correct? I'm very happy that you have chosen to assist me! Kurama's life had raced before his eyes as she closed her eyes, grinned, and clapped her hands together. Her flaming red hair fell lifelessly behind her as the core energy chain swiftly withdrew. A trickle of cold sweat ran down Kurama's back. Eager to prevent a replay of the unadulterated horror he had seen, Kurama began, let's start with what we know. Do you know if he likes you? Well, perhaps? Kurama rolled his eyes once more as she twirled one end of her hair between her hands, blushing. Deep in contemplation, Kurama crossed his forelegs and said, if the attraction is reciprocal, why not begin by preparing him a meal as a thank you? People frequently tell me that a man's stomach is the way to his heart. That's not a bad idea, Kushina said, slowly nodding her head. What ought I to prepare for him? She inquired. What appeals to him? Is she more stupid than I assumed? Do I really need to ask this question? Kushina scowled. I don't know actually. How about making some brownies instead? It appears that you humans have a strong preference for sweets, Kurama proposed. You're sure he'll enjoy brownies? She was growing fond of the concept. Kurama urged him, I'm sure he will like it since you made it for him. Excellent. Kurama, thank you for your assistance! Kurama barely had time to react before she blew herself out of existence. Kurama thought, well, it's just brownies. How bad can it be? Perhaps I should have inquired if she knew how to cook. People rushed and gave Kushina Uzumaki a wide berth as she stormed down the street, knowing that she was about to end something or someone. The brownies hadn't turned out well. Kurama complained inside, I didn't know that cocoa powder could be set on fire, so it's not my fault that you set your kitchen on fire. As she was about to snarl a comeback, Kushina slammed into something and landed on her butt. Hey! Observe your direction! She stroked her butt while shouting. I apologize. However, you invited me over, you know, a voice that I recognized replied. When Kushina looked up, she saw Minato smiling and extending her his hand. Almost forgetting her wrath, Kushina blushed, accepted Minato's hand, and pulled herself to her feet. What are you doing outside, then? Minato inquired. I dunno. I'm starving. Dinner will be my treat, So let's go! As she seized Minato's arm and began pulling him away. Kushina spoke quickly. Minato squinted as he turned his head back and headed down the street toward Kushina's origin. Is your apartment complex experiencing a fire? Why don't we return and have a look first? Did he ask. As other firefighters rushed past them carrying buckets of water, she sighed. It's nothing, don't worry about it. It was a disastrous meal. Nobody knew exactly what had happened. 1 minute, the market district was rocked by a huge explosion, and the next, a huge fire engulfed the restaurant, sending the district into chaos. Firefighters fought the fire for 6 hours straight before it was put out, and Hyde Village General Hospital was crowded with shell-shock survivors and walking wounded, a scene reminiscent of the worst days of the Second Shinobi War. That evening, there were 2 new customers at the local police station. Minato, who had been accused of disrupting the peace, sat in one cell, stunned to stillness. Kushina, who is accused of several charges of disturbing the peace and aggravated assault, sat in the adjacent cell with her head down in shame. She also had to pay a fine for headbutting an Inuzuka clan dog that had been out for a stroll. It took Minato an hour to say, "Well, you certainly know how to show me a good time." On the grass in the mindscape, Kurama screamed with amusement as Kushina's head sank even more in shame. Kurama was awakened by a mild earthquake in the mindscape. He thought, that's different. Kurama worriedly accessed the shared senses. Kurama kept their link open until Kushina opened her eyes, and he saw a flicker of a familiar golden hair in her vision, but her eyes were closed, and he could hear heavy breathing. Ah, good for her. Kurama instantly broke off the shared senses and curled back up, but the rolling earthquakes made it hard for him to fall back asleep. When Kushina arrived for her visit that Sunday, she discovered Kurama grinning and waiting for her, and she felt compelled to slap him. Kurama, wiping a tear from his eyes with his paw, stated sadly, "It seems our little Kunoichi is now all grown up." Kushina's face flushed. "You saw ? She stumbled. As his expression darkened, Kurama chuckled, just enough to see what was happening. "I've been thinking it's time that Minato changed his nickname to something more appropriate," he said. "May I also inquire what his new moniker ought to be ? Unaware of the trap Kurama was enticing her into, Kushina asked suspiciously. "He need to adopt the moniker Yellow Flasher !" At his childish jest, Kurama laughed and shouted in delight. Kurama yelled as core energy chains rained down from the sky and dug deep into his tails, but Kushina was already gone when he looked up in agony. Kushina's uppercut lifted Kurama into the air, causing him to feel searing pain throughout his body. Kurama flew back 100 meters and landed with a thud. In between painful episodes, Kurama thought, "Wordy. Maybe I should have told her she's pregnant." No. Despite being strong enough to contain a tailed beast, the seal was at its weakest when the mother bore a new life inside her. Therefore Kurama kept his presence to a minimum during the last stages of Kushina's pregnancy. He was totally unprepared when the mindscape began to shake wildly. "Kushina ? Did he ask?" Bits of soil protruded from the ground, and the earth under Kurama trembled furiously as hairline fissures split across the afternoon sky. "Kushina." The ground beneath Kurama gave way and disappeared, and Kurama fell screaming into the black abyss as the sky broke apart into a million pieces and turned to darkness. Kurama opened his eyes again. This must end. He took a deep breath and thought, this is real. He could feel the cool evening air and the soft grass beneath him. He was in the real world. When Kurama opened his eyes, he saw Kushina lying on the ground in front of him. She was weak but alive, and standing beside her was a man with short black hair wearing a black cloak. The orange mask completely covered his face, creating a swirling pattern that ended in a single dark hole where the eye should have been. As if evaluating him, the man turned and glanced up at Kurama, who used this moment to construct a much-needed lifeline. Pure core energy dripped from the tail nearest the ground, and the core energy droplets struck the ground and bounced, changing into tiny foxes at the peak of the bounce and darting into the woods. Kurama could sense his proxies splitting a few more times as they sped off into the night. The man wearing the orange mask materialized on top of Kurama's nose just as he was beginning to feel the last of the proxies disappear into the distance. A displacement technique. Kurama concentrated on the man's mask hole. Behind the hole, the eye flashed red. Sharingan. Kurama felt his consciousness waning and cursed himself again. A massive demon fox, encircled by core energy fire, roared fearfully as it lifted its head in the moonlight deep within the forest. The demon shrugged off their strongest explosive tags and kunai without slowing down, and each swipe of 9 tails felled trees and cratered the land. The losses had been terrible, with the demon fox tearing straight through all 3 of the hastily assembled defensive lines, freezing or killing weaker shinobi as the massive killing intent that pulsed out of the 9 beasts leveled entire sections of the forest and clawed at their hiding places. The Yondaime had landed on top of Gamabunta just as the demon was ready to destroy the northern part of the village wall, and the first of the Toad clan fought the demon fox and managed to momentarily subdue him before Minato teleported the fox away. The headmaster of Hiruzen III had doubted the strategy's efficacy at first because the fox could easily return to Hyde Village and Gamabunta couldn't compete with the beast in a long battle, but now he saw the awful significance of his successor's last-ditch effort. When he and his ANBU guards reached the enormous clearing, the third headmaster in full battle, G, was still mentally tallying the deaths. They gazed. A rough stone altar stood in the middle of the clearing, and before him, Kushina Uzumaki and Minato Namikaze were dead in a bloody embrace on the ground, their eyes closed, their faces smeared with mud and smeared with dry tears. Oh Minato! Had you only told me what you planned to do? The third headmaster was startled out of his reverie by the faint sound of a baby's cries, and he rushed to the stone altar, where a golden blonde infant was crying. As he grasped the full magnitude of Minato and Kushina's sacrifice, the third headmaster fought back tears and took the infant into his arms, blanket and all, rocking him lovingly. The third headmaster gave the order, "Dog, let the Onizuka tracking teams know that we have located the Yondaime and Kushina Uzumaki. Have them go to Sector 112 to find the Yondaime as escorts. Before transferring the bodies, have the investigative teams do a thorough analysis after the escorts have been located." The silver-haired Anbu nodded. "Report directly to me when you have the results. Cat, send a recovery team here by getting in touch with Shikaku Nara at the command center. Instruct him to compile a tally of our casualties and the post-battle damage assessment. Communicate with the civilian council and let the advisors know what has transpired. Inform them." The purple-haired Anbu dipped her head in acknowledgement, saying, "Tell them I am temporarily in charge until a suitable headmaster replacement can be found." The 2 ANBU disappeared in a whirl of leaves as he dismissed them with a nod. With a sigh, the third headmaster glanced down at the baby who was sniffling. Giant anguish reverberated in Kurama's head as he woke up from his vague nightmare and realized he was once more imprisoned. Kurama reassured himself, "If I'm locked away, then the masked man's plan didn't work out. But I'm sure Kushina made it out okay. She's a tough one." Kurama decided to put the depressing thoughts aside because he was never very adept at deceiving himself. Kurama sat up and looked around. Water pooled around his legs as he shrank to a more manageable form. Kurama studied the inscriptions on his cage and pressed one of his paws against the bar. Wonderful, he thought as he stared past the bars of his cage and into the darkness. At least they added something new this time. Though, it's not as strong as it can be. I can feel my core energy leaking out of the cage. Maybe whoever sealed me didn't have enough time to properly perform the seal. Kurama thought for a moment as he said the 8 trigrams seal to no one in particular. Whoever locked me in here intended my jailer to have access to my core energy. Thus this was done on purpose, Kurama decided. He was very certain of who his new jailer would be, and Uzumaki would have been the most apparent choice, and since he and Kushina did not share the same mindscape, he was sealed in the nearest Uzumaki candidate, the one with Namikaze's ancestry. Kurama determined he owed it to Kushina to do everything in his power to help this youngster, and he sighed at the despair and misery the parents must have felt as they sacrificed their newborn to contain him. Kurama thought, "It's not like I was doing anything more meaningful anyway." Kurama lay down again and saw a mote of light dancing wildly just outside the cage. He squinted at it and felt the radiance of sheer horror. Grasping the mote of light in his little decreased tails, Kurama rocked it gently and murmured a soft lullaby, a tune he remembered from Mida's days as a mother. Kurama expanded his tails and pushed against the seal, which strained but gave way only slightly. As the terror subsided, the mote calmed down and became brighter and stronger. Kurama infused the mote with sentiments of coziness and warmth, as well as pictures of a grinning Kushina and Minato. In answer, the mote flashed once, twice, and then vanished forever, glowing brightly and exuding warmth. Kurama pulled his tails back and lay down, grinning and closing his eyes, but alone once more. On his journey back to Hyde Village, the third headmaster, who had been so terrified of the damage report that he had hardly noticed the baby had ceased crying, leapt from tree to tree. When the third headmaster saw the whisker marks that graced the baby's face for the first time, he He stopped at the next branch out of concern and carefully peeled back the blue blanket covering the baby's face. Two enormous blue saucers cooed merrily and peered back at him. "It's good to meet you, Mito," said the third headmaster, grinning at the infant. 4-year-old Naruto emerged from an unlit alleyway under a moonless sky, barefoot and disheveled. His dark green sandals were gone, his pants and forearms were covered in dirt, and his right pant leg was ripped from knee to toe. His signature white shirt with the red fire spiral smelled of sweat and alcohol, and his left shoulder hurt a little from where the wine bottle had hit him. Stone lanterns dimly illuminated the streets as Naruto shuffled along, but he did not notice the various mansions and estates behind the white walls running down the length of the street on both sides. Naruto paused for a moment to quiet the pounding in his heart, but a faint echo in the breeze pushed him forward, so he backed away from the echo, turned, and limped hurriedly in the opposite direction. Far behind Naruto, a man came around a corner, squinted at him, and began pointing and shouting. 2 more people followed, then 5, and then there was a full group of inebriated, irate, violent men and women. Naruto continued to limp away, his fear overwhelming the pain in his right ankle, and he cast a terrified glimpse behind him. He was encouraged by an inner voice. "Move more quickly." Naruto had made a terrible mistake. His eyes widened as the street ended abruptly in white stone steps that led up to a set of rounded red doors. 2 torches hung on either side of the door, each illuminating imposing stone statues twice as tall as a normal man, depicting monkey warriors in combat stances, with the left arm of the statue holding 2 axes, one in an outstretched arm at an angle, and the other held above and behind the statue. The statue on the left was standing on its right leg, with the left leg folded against the main body, while the right leg was turned away in a crouch. The right statue had a thick staff in its right hand, which was slightly raised behind its hips, and an outstretched left arm that ended in an open arm. Having run out of options, Naruto hobbled up the stairs and staggered over to the red doors, where a wooden plaque with red lettering set in a gold engraving was affixed. He recognized the big, golden character that read, "Monkey," on the left door. Since Naruto was too short for the rounded bronze door knockers, he started beating the door with his little fists and screamed as loudly as he could. The air was filled with the shouting and jeering of the crowd as they approached. They shouted, "Demon," while improvised missiles and rotting vegetables were hurled at Naruto. As the crowd walked up the stone steps, Naruto stopped beating, ran out of steam, and fell to his knees, crying. "Enough." The crowd was suddenly stunned to quiet by a powerful voice that seemed to originate from everywhere. The voice's raw strength caused the trees that lined the street to shake. The bewildered group glanced at one another and peered about for the source. When some of the more perceptive audience members noticed the inscriptions, they began to gradually withdraw. The big wooden doors creaked backwards, and the throng froze. As Naruto pitched forwards, a pair of hands tainted by age and combat swooped down and held him up. Naruto resisted softly as he was lifted up by strong, shielding arms. Naruto stopped struggling and glanced up. He was acquainted with this individual. "GG," Naruto whispered softly. The third headmaster nodded while glancing down. His anger concealed behind a mask, he grinned at Naruto. "It's okay now. You're safe." The world became dark for Naruto. At the orphanage on the outskirts of Hyde Village, October 10th was simply another ordinary day. The orphanage was a straightforward wooden structure, a 2-story, long, rectangular structure with a roof that sloped slightly and was covered in traditional blue ceramic tiles. On the front end of the building was a clocker tower, a little higher. The main level included many classrooms and playrooms, a dining hall that served as an assembly space, a huge kitchen, a nursery, a visitor's lounge for prospective parents, a basic greeting area at the main entrance, and more. Large rectangular windows that let in sunshine were present in every room. Even though the second story was a little smaller, it still had enough beds and rooms for at least 100 kids and the caregivers they needed. After the Second Shinobi War, a benevolent medical nin had established the orphanage. The orphanage was always overcrowded in those days, and the children frequently had to share quarters. But now, fewer than 25% of the rooms were in use. True, there had been an unexpected surge in orphans following the Demon Fox attack 4 years prior, but the majority of the kids had been taken up by nearby residents and distant family members. Adoption was never considered for more than one child. According to the orphanage's records, Naruto was now 4 years old. He was the orphan who had stayed the longest in addition to being the oldest. At first, Naruto had a lot of pals, but he lost touch with them when they were adopted out one by one. Even though he clung to the slim hope that he would one day have family, He was always aware of the accusing glances that guests would give him whenever they saw him. After a while, Mito just gave up and stayed alone most of the time, either daydreaming on the roof or exploring the nearby forests. Thanks to rumors in the civilian committee that oversaw their funding, the caregivers were aware of his secret. The head caretaker merely acquiesced to the council's covert requests from Mito in exchange for additional cash, although being well aware of their petty vindictiveness. The caretakers tried to raise Naruto's profile for the Shinobi Academy recruitment teachers because they knew that no one would ever accept him due to the prejudice that was already in place. According to the council's demands, Naruto was punished by the caretakers for the smallest violation by being forced to perform core energy molding exercises. To increase his stamina, they urged Naruto to run and play alone in the woods, although a retired Jounin who was now his guardian was often surreptitiously watching him. Apart from the caregivers, the only consistency in Naruto's life was the friendly elderly man with the amusing hat who occasionally paid a visit to the orphanage. During his brief visits, Naruto saw that the third headmaster gave him more attention than the other orphans. The happy kids were always showered with candy and confections when the elderly man came to visit, but he always saved a little extra for Naruto. Today, Naruto had woken up quite early. One of the caregivers had pulled him away to perform core energy molding exercises after he had eaten breakfast by himself in the dining area. When Naruto initially learned the lesson, he struggled for 3 days, but he continued to practice diligently until it came naturally to him. After lunch, Naruto was let loose by the caretaker to explore the forest alone. He spent an hour bathing in a pond he had discovered during a previous outing, and then he spent the remainder of his time hunting rabbits and other tiny woodland animals. Naruto was totally worn out by the time he came back and showered. Before the sun had completely set, he rushed to finish his dinner in the dining room and jumped into his bed's gentle embrace. A few hours later, Naruto was roused from his reverie by a soft thump. Naruto sat up, stretched his arms in the air, and yawned. A thump. Naruto swung his feet off the bed and got to his feet, curious. He moved stealthily in the direction of his window, listening for the source of the sound. A thump. 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 Naruto threw open the window and turned to face the source of the sounds, letting the crisp evening air fill his room. The light show in front of him dazzled him. Several missiles screamed in the air as they arched into the dark evening sky in the distance. The missiles burst into a million multicolored fragments near the top of their arc, which descended back toward Earth. "It's really lovely," Naruto gaped. With his interest sparked, Naruto hurriedly changed out of his jammies and put on his orange track pants and white shirt. He hauled himself up over the window edge and onto the roof, adjusting the straps on his sandals. He moved silently toward the rear of the building, scurrying across the blue clay tiles that faced the second-story wall. In order to avoid drawing attention to himself, Naruto wrapped his body around the little metal drainage pipe and slid down in silence. As he reached the ground, he knelt down and remained silent, listening for any indications of discovery. Naruto paused for a while, then smiled and ran across the open yard. At the thought of something novel and thrilling, he nearly forgot his fear as he hurried in the direction of the spectacle's origin. His eyes were so unbelievable to Naruto. The biggest crowd he had ever seen in his life was in front of him, beyond the rows of bushes he was hiding in. A year after the great demon fox was vanquished, the festival was a relatively recent occurrence. Initially designated as a commemoration for the shinobi who bravely defended the village, the day was stolen by avaricious people hoping to profit from the event and make a quick profit. They achieved greater success than they could have imagined. As more and more people came to witness the sight, the festivities that followed became louder and more boisterous. The village center, a circular, stone-paved space with several streets intersecting and branching out from it, was the venue for the celebration. The circle's outside edge was bordered by trees and bushes, and the moonless night was illuminated by stings of paper lanterns that hung from wooden posts. The festival's focal point was an effigy of the demon fox that was suspended in the center of the village from a big wooden pole with a rope around its neck. Crudely constructed, the effigy was a collection of sacks filled with compost and dried leaves, sewn together with the dexterity of an underworld surgeon, and suspended by the neck over a huge hole. The effigy's head was ornamented with a badly rendered visage with a humorously melancholy frown. Even without the 9 long bags sewn to the torso, it would have been difficult to pinpoint the precise inspiration. Naruto felt a surge of laughter when he saw the rudimentary effigy. Stalls of all colors lined the streets and around the stand close to the trees. Freshly cooked foods and fish, rigged games with big printed signs that said, "No core energy," to prevent any shinobi from wiping out the stock, and peddlers selling fireworks, animal masks, and other ornamental trinkets were all on display at the kiosks. The smell of roasted chicken filled Naruto's senses, and his own stomach rumbled. He watched with hunger and licked his lips. Naruto watched the festival attendees, staring at them. People of all sizes and shapes were present. Some were small and obese, while others were tall and thin. The majority had brown or black hair, but one woman in particular had pink hair that was secured with a golden headdress. Some wore denim shorts and t-shirts, while others wore multicolored yukatas and traditional kimonos. The individuals he saw yelled excitedly at absurd games of chance, laughed themselves stupid, and clung to one another. Naruto's throat constricted. Even though the celebrations were taking place in front of him, he felt alone in the world at that moment. Why am I not able to have this? What? He asked himself. Naruto suddenly wrenched his eyes from the masses and fixed them on the sky. Naruto put his thoughts aside and made his choice because he did not understand why he was different and why he was hiding in the bushes rather than standing in the street like everyone else with this line of thinking. Naruto turned to creep away after taking one last glance at the event. The moment has come to return to the orphanage. The celebrations were cut short by a loud statement that Naruto was unable to hear. He paused and raised his head. The crowd began to shuffle as one toward the effigy and the middle of the hamlet. In order to get onto one of the lower branches, Naruto clambered up a tree. He desired to observe what was taking place. Wearing a gold and white kimono, a tall balding man with gray hair and tanned skin spoke into a megaphone he held in his left hand. With his right hand, he clutched and waved a lit torch. As the audience began yelling louder and louder, Naruto found it difficult to understand what the man was saying. As the man raised the torch to the sky and slashed it into effigy, the chorus of cries peaked. As the effigy was swiftly engulfed in a fiery embrace, the audience applauded. With tremendous acclaim, the announcer bent low. As the effigy's thread broke and its burned remains dropped into the pit to smolder, Naruto watched with macabre interest. The bald man looked around the throng, grinning as he raised his head. The man's eyes paused and stared at Naruto, and he froze. The man pointed furiously in Naruto's approximate direction while shouting something incoherently. The audience stopped talking and looked at Naruto. His stomach began to get uneasy as everyone in the village center looked at him with blatant disdain. Naruto instantly ducked as a rock the size of an adult fist flew past his head in response to a yell from someone in the throng. As the rest of the audience began to yell, Naruto turned and leapt down the branch. He rolled forward after a flawless landing on the ground, regaining momentum as improvised missiles sprang up all around him. On his arms and knees, Naruto clambered through the bushes, but his feet became caught in twigs. Hurrying to untie himself, he turned and undid his sandals. Naruto sprinted ahead, clambering over a fence and dropping his sandals. He caught his pants on a piece of wire when he swung his legs over. Naruto pulled on his legs and fell off the barrier, tearing the fabric. Before spilling out onto a side street, Naruto got back up and moved between a few stalls. Shopkeepers shouted and pointed at Naruto as he ran out of the village center. Naruto noticed that some of the throng was pursuing him as he ran and turned to look behind. Naruto was still a little child. Despite his great agility, the mob quickly caught up to him. As he swerved down the roadway, sticks, debris, and drink containers flew into the air and fell all around him. He was struck in the shoulder by a half-empty sake bottle, which poured its contents out. As alcohol poured across his upper body, Naruto yelled in agony and clutched his shoulder, but he continued to run. A voice inside him screamed out as he came to a gloomy junction. On the left, the voice gave an order. Naruto decelerated. Now the voice, apparently irritated, yelled, "Go left." At the crossroads, Naruto took a left turn. "Proceed to the right now." As Naruto got closer to an alley, the voice persisted. Naruto complied once more. Even though it was pitch black, he ran down the lane full throttle. A huge pile of bagged trash materialized in front of him as his eyes adjusted just in time. Instinctively, Naruto jumped, allowing the force of his run to propel him over the trash. However, his left foot slid on the damp asphalt as he hit the ground. As a result of the bad landing, Naruto shouted in agony and extended his right leg to stabilize himself. Naruto tripped and fell, landing face down on the ground. Naruto groaned and used his left leg to push himself against the wall. "Act quickly," the voice demanded. Naruto left the alley, squirming with agony with every step. As Naruto passed out, a furious third headmaster clung to him. with a little trail of smoke from the cigarette in his lips. A young man with a Chunin vest, short, spiky black hair, and a goatee emerged from behind the third headmaster. He shook his head after glancing at the scene in front of him. The fools. The third headmaster looked across at Asuma. Asuma's cigarette was sliced in half by the stem of a wind core energy blade. Asuma gulped uneasily and spat out the cigarette stump. There was no room for debate when the third headmaster ordered solemnly, "Asuma, take Naruto to the hospital and have the doctors examine him." As the older third headmaster gave him the blonde child, Asuma nodded. A silver-haired Anbu appeared beside Asuma and knelt down, saying, "Dog." The third headmaster ordered, "Go with him. Make sure they get to the hospital without any distractions." Both men shunned towards the hospital without saying anything further when the dog nodded. Third headmaster's mask gave way to an expression of indifference, and the smile he had worn for Naruto disappeared. This was the same look that made fellow cages halt and stopped enemy Jounan in their tracks. This was the visage of a cold-blooded murderer who knew 1,000 ways to kill an adversary without getting up from his position. Currently on sabbatical was the pleasant old leader who welcomed locals on the street and handed candies to laughing youngsters. "So," said the third headmaster. His gaze flicked out to the throng of villagers gathering before him. Although several people in the crowd were aware of the headmaster's potentially near-violent nature, the third headmaster's voice was neutral as he said, "Will someone please explain to me what happened?" The audience looked at each other anxiously and kept mute. The big balding oaf with the megaphone, who was the least intelligent of the group, bravely forced his way to the front of the gathered crowd to confront the elderly guy head-on. As he jabbed a finger at third headmaster, he said, "We were gonna punish the demon for ruining our fun." The crowd's faces were covered in blood. "Y'all let him get away from us, so I'm holding. You're responsible for all the damage he caused." They no longer have the option to negotiate their way out of this. Normally used to a certain amount of respect, the third headmaster was utterly unprepared for the man's boldness. For an instant, he was shocked, but only briefly. He asked, "And just how did Naruto ruin your fun?" The oaf exclaimed, "He was there," as though that was enough to explain everything that had transpired. Finally, the third headmaster asked, "Can you be more specific?" As the third headmaster stared at him, the oaf screamed, "He was there when he shouldn't have been. He was going to ruin everything again like he did 4 years ago, so I was going to banish the demon like he should have been from the beginning." The individual said, "The demon's only olive caused that goddamn failure of the headmaster ain't man enough to kill him and now he's dead 'cause of his stupidity." The audience let out a gasp. The oaf would be using a huge mallet hammer to bang on any button that could irritate the third headmaster. The crowd's faces were inspected by the third headmaster. The man was repelled by everyone. "What's the matter? You not man enough to look at me in the eyes. You're just a washed-up has-been whipping up the failure's shit," the oaf yelled. The third headmaster suddenly unleashed a tremendous shockwave of murderous intent. Amidst kicking up mud and swinging branches, the storm of sheer power pushed the entire crowd face first onto the ground. Windows and doors rattled in response to the slight shaking of building foundations that extended as far as the edge of Hyde Village. Panicked animals screamed, as startled birds fled into the night. The man who had been so noisy and rude was now on the ground, panting. The man yelled in terror as the third headmaster approached him and scurried backward on his hands and butt. A male voice said, "What is the meaning of this?" from his right. Without glancing at the trio, the third headmaster deadpanned, "Homura, Koharu, how good of you to show up. And I see you've brought Danzo along. Whatever you are doing, you must stop at once. This is a matter for the civilian council since it doesn't involve your shinobis," the old woman said. The third headmaster looked around, finally focusing on his former teammates. Danzo appeared distant, while Koharu and Homura gave him rebellious looks in return. The 3 elders were flanked by 6 Anbu, but each one bowed to their headmaster. The third headmaster asked kindly, "Is that so? Well, why don't we convene the council right now then?" "Right now." The left hand of the third headmaster emerged from beneath the robes before Koharu could raise any more objections. He clenched his fist and gestured to the throng with his hand before drawing it away from his face. They knelt, and the Anbu disappeared, only to return around the throng in a hexagonal shape. They collapsed their hands together and flashed through a lengthy series of hand signals as one. Jutsu no Suiro. As the wetness was drawn toward the center of the crowd, the third headmaster sensed the air drying. A little droplet of water formed, steadily expanding and spinning faster and faster. As the water jail expanded, more and more of the recuperating villagers were caught inside. As the stranded villagers fought to hold their breath, the third headmaster gazed. "Stop this at once, third headmaster," yelled Koharu. Ignoring her, the third headmaster commanded, "Take them to the council chambers." Each of the 6 Anbu used one arm to support the water prison's structural integrity as they made their way to the headmaster tower. The 3 advisors caught the third headmaster's attention. Homura shook his head disapprovingly, and Koharu's face was flushed with rage. Danzo stayed distant, although there was a faint smirk on his face. Putting the people in their proper place was something he always enjoyed. The third headmaster pondered. Homura declared, "I will summon the council." As he left, the third headmaster threw back, "You better hurry. I don't think those villagers can hold their breath for too long." Danzo trailed behind. When awareness hit, Homura and Koharu turned pale and fled without a fuss. The third headmaster closed his eyes and stepped before his chair in the council chambers. Danzo sat in a chair to his left, thinking to himself in peaceful silence. Standing off to the right, the Anbu quietly maintained their water prison while sometimes releasing a bubble of air into a large ball of water. The council chamber was a circular, carpeted space with about 24 wooden chairs and a large circular oak table. Behind the chair of the third headmaster, 3 enormous portraits of the former headmasters hung, and the ceiling and walls were painted beige. The chamber was lit with off-white light bulbs, a relatively recent lightning country invention that was still undergoing testing. With a loud bang, a pair of double doors across from the third headmaster were flung open. As they poured into the room, civilian councilors yelled and begged the third headmaster. The military council entered the room nonchalantly, seemingly oblivious to what they were seeing. The councilors stood and went on with their respective tirades while they sat down. "You have no right. This is a matter for thee." The third headmaster opened his eyes and let out a breath. "Sit," he ordered everyone. The yelling went on. As a great sense of murderous purpose engulfed the room, he said, "Sit." Like schoolchildren facing an irate headmaster, the councilors found their seats immediately. As they sat to his left and right, Homura and Koharu avoided looking at the third headmaster. The third headmaster nodded to the Anbu and grinned coldly, saying, "Good, we can get started now." The Anbu stopped the jutsu and pulled their arms away. Water and inhabitants were strewn everywhere when the prison collapsed violently. As water splattered into their robes and other ornamental items, councilors erupted and yelled in shock. The third headmaster swallowed a smile. One of the more respectable councilors raised his voice. "Please, Headmaster Sama, what is the meaning behind this display?" he inquired. The third headmaster said, "As you know, today is October 10th, the 4th anniversary of the Kyobi attack. While this is certainly a cause of celebrations, a citizen of Hyde Village was attacked tonight." The assembled councilors were in stunned silence. "Who was attacked?" inquired another councilor. "The demon," the shivering villagers from the crowd yelled. Once more, the obeso forced his way forward. In front of the civilian councilors, the man had somehow got the nerve to say, "Yea, that's right. We hurt the demon brat. We would have killed him too if it ain't for him." Instead. "Normal," another pampered man-child wailing to his mother. The third headmaster surveyed the table. The Shinobi War Council only gaped at the man's bluster. Even though he had just confessed to attacking a youngster, demon container or not, a sizable percentage of the civilian councilors shook their heads in disgust at man's impertinence and total lack of respect. "We should have killed him." The man was now in a tirade. "Let him die in the streets like the good-for-nothing headmaster you call a fourth." Everybody in the room let out a gasp. Nobody was foolish enough to believe that Hydeville could have avoided danger without the Yellow Flash's sacrifice. Some members of both councils were unable to remember how many times the Yondaime had saved them on the field. Danzo even squinted at the ludicrous taunts. The third headmaster remained silent and closed his eyes. The man was arguing on behalf of the third headmaster. The civilian councilors were nodding and whispering to one another as he opened his eyes. The councilors sat up straight and fixed their eyes on the third headmaster as soon as the muttering stopped. A representative in a white kimono with silver hair got to his feet. He said to the third headmaster, "Headmaster Sama, the civilian council does not approve of any attack on a fellow Hyde Village citizen. We also strongly condemn this man's insults regarding the honored Yondaime. As these villagers have brazenly revealed an S-class military secret, this issue is no longer under our jurisdiction. We turn these villagers over to you for judgment and hope you will find it in your heart to be lenient." While the other villagers appeared terrified for their life, the obese man sputtered in shock. As a group, the remaining civilian councillors stood and bowed before the third headmaster. As the councillors started to quietly file out of the room, the third headmaster bowed back. Unable to believe that their small plan to challenge the headmaster's authority had failed so miserably, Koharu and Homura sat with their mouths open. Danzo cleared his throat. The third headmaster turned. "Do you have something you wish to add, Danzo?" As Danzo started, "With your permission, Headmaster Sama," the third headmaster's eyes narrowed. Danzo was displaying reverence, which indicated that he was seeking something. "I would like to personally question these upstanding citizens. I want to be absolutely certain that there was no evidence of instigation by a foreign power." He stopped before continuing. "I'm also sure there is much I can do to help these citizens from making the same mistake again." Oh. Now the third headmaster understood. Both Danzo and the third headmaster took care of Naruto in their respective ways, despite their occasional disagreements. Since Naruto was a favored grandchild and the village owed him a great lot for his and his parents' sacrifices, the third headmaster took an interest in him. Danzo treated Naruto with the same level of care that a samurai would give his swords. Danzo's concealed meaning was accurately read by the third headmaster. "Let me take care of this. You must teach these idiots a lesson that you cannot be seen giving." Danzo was furious because a group of inebriated village fools had almost cost Hyde Village a valuable military weapon. He glanced to the obese guy, who was clearly pale. "I would greatly appreciate your help in this matter," the third headmaster remarked quietly. "But, if you would, can you please give this man your personal attention?" he said. Danzo stood and bowed, nodding. "Of course, I will be sure to find out everything he knows." The bow was returned by the third headmaster. With Danzo following, the Anbu nodded and led the trembling villagers out the door. "Escort these fine citizens down to interrogation." To no one in particular, the third headmaster declared, "The rest of you are dismissed." With a nod, the war council moved out, whispering to one another. Furious, Homura and Koharu trailed behind. For once, the third headmaster expressed gratitude for Danzo. He thought Danzo's ways were disgusting, but sometimes it was important to use disgusting methods. Particularly in the world of shinobi. The third headmaster pondered. The third headmaster mentally noted that he should give Danzo a basket of fruit later. He will first check on Naruto's condition, though. Naruto tried to breathe, gagging as he thrashed and raised his head out of the water. After a few seconds of dry heaving, he sat up straight and looked about. The old man went where? "Hello? Is anyone there?" "Quiet." Naruto scowled and looked around him. He was seated in a half-flooded hallway where the water seemed to be standing on concrete floors. The ceiling was plastered red by what seemed like emergency lighting, and the walls were covered with pipes of various sizes. "I'd better leave now so I don't get into any problems." With a sigh of pleasure when there was no pain, Naruto carefully reached out and prodded his right ankle. He pulled himself to his feet using the metal pipes that ran along the walls. "My jeans were mended, huh?" Naruto stared puzzledly down at his trousers, but concluded that after he left, he might find out. He looked down the hallway and up. The passage continued into complete darkness out to his right. Similar to where he was standing, the corridor to his left appeared to be illuminated by emergency lights. Naruto went to his left and began to walk, choosing what appeared to be the safest route. The red emergency lights went out 15 minutes later. Naruto gazed into the gloom in front of him. "Hey, I see something." He narrowed his eyes. Indeed, a faint flicker of light appeared. Naruto placed his palm on the wall's pipes and used them to point in the direction of the light. This was not what he had anticipated at the end of the hallway. The hallway led to a huge room with cubicles. The room was so large that Naruto could see the ceiling and walls fading into the night. He saw what seemed like a huge cage with heavy metal pillars supporting the bars. Behind the bars of the cage was a red mound of fur. Naruto went to the door of the cage. He extended his hand to touch the bars, but an imperceptible barrier stopped him in his tracks. Several black lettering came to life and began to glow green. He noticed a quick movement outside the bars. As the crimson hill trembled and uncurled, Naruto slowly retreated. The hill's summit rose and spread out backward, splitting into 9 waving tails. 2 dark streaks emerged from the center of the hill and extended to the left and right as the front of the hill continued to rise. Naruto looked and craned his neck. Impossibly big eyes were revealed when the streaks opened up. A row of razor-sharp fangs, each the height of an adult male, emerged from a mouth as big as Hyde Village Central Avenue. Tuyon, the creature raised its arms above its head and twitched its ears. The animal possessed a distinctly. Look at it, Foxy. Naruto's mouth was fixed on the screen. It lowered its head languidly and gazed directly at Naruto, silently examining him. I must be having a dream. There was a rumbling, deep laugh from the fox. The fox told him, you aren't dreaming. Whoa. It has mind-reading abilities. Fantastic. No, I can't read minds. But I can read faces very, very easily, especially stupid ones like yours. The fox laughed at him. Naruto angrily yelled, don't call my face stupid, stupid, while the fox laughed with mirth at the feeble protest. Just who do you think you are anyway, huh? Don't you know who I am? With a deadpan expression, the fox said, you are Uzumaki, Naruto. He stopped laughing and looked directly at him. Naruto fell silent. He wasn't prepared for such response. He stabbed the thing with his finger and yelled again. Well, who the heck are you then? Reaching its farthest height, the fox gazed down upon Naruto. The creature's voice roared powerfully in the empty room. I am known as the nine-beasted demon fox. The declaration was so loud that Naruto almost toppled over. You humans also call me the Lord of Destruction. Agony and despair made manifest. The trickster god who steals from all. In a barely heard whisper, the fox said, and I am the reason everyone hates you. Quiet. What?